The late afternoon sun painted the quiet suburban road in hues of gold and crimson as Kira Mason eased her Tesla Model 3 down the smooth asphalt. The gentle hum of the electric motor, paired with the calming melodies streaming through the speakers, created a serene bubble around her. But the peace shattered in an instant. Flashing red and blue lights lit up her rearview mirror, slicing through the tranquil evening. Kira's heart sank, though she knew she had done nothing wrong. She glanced at her speedometer, well within the limit. Her meticulously maintained car gleamed under the flashing lights as she pulled to the side, gravel crunching beneath her tires. Through her side mirror, Kira saw the officer step out of his cruiser, his stride rigid with authority. His mirrored sunglasses reflected the blinding sun as he approached her car. License and registration, his voice barked, cold and impersonal, even before she could roll her window down completely. "Of course, officer," Kira replied, her voice steady but wary. She handed over her documents with practiced ease, her mind racing. What could this possibly be about? Without explanation, the officer glanced over her paperwork with a dismissive scoff, his flashlight sweeping the car's interior. "You're driving quite the setup here," he muttered, his tone laced with suspicion. Before she could respond, the words hit like a sledgehammer. "Step out of the vehicle." Kira's calm exterior cracked slightly. "May I ask why, officer?" His hand hovered near his belt, a silent warning. "Step out now." As Kira exited her car under his scrutinizing gaze, she had no idea this routine stop was about to take a dangerous turn. A turn that would leave the officer begging for mercy mere moments later. The warm glow of the sunset illuminated Kira Mason's determined face as she gripped the wheel of her sleek Tesla Model 3. Every detail of the car reflected her meticulous attention to precision and technology, attributes that mirrored her own life. As the founder and CEO of Mason Cybersecurity Solutions, Kira had worked tirelessly to build her company from the ground up. Her days were consumed by meetings with high-powered clients, late nights debugging code, and an unwavering focus on innovation. At just 29, she was a trailblazer in a male-dominated industry, her accomplishments earning her both admiration and envy. To Kira, the Tesla wasn't just a car, it was a symbol of her hard work. Every feature, from the cutting-edge AI to the seamless connectivity, was a testament to the technological prowess she championed in her career. But tonight, the drive was about unwinding. She'd spent the day in back-to-back strategy meetings, and the open road was her solace. Humming along to the music playing softly through the premium speakers, Kira finally felt the tension of the day melting away. That peace shattered the moment Officer Walter Hayes entered the scene. Hayes was the kind of cop who wore authority like armor. His polished badge and crisp uniform gave him a sense of power he wielded liberally. A veteran of 15 years, Hayes had once joined the force with dreams of protecting his community, but over time, those ideals had eroded. His years on the job had hardened him, making him cynical and, at times, reckless. What started as a mission to serve justice had turned into a routine of profiling, assumptions, and the occasional abuse of power to assert control. It wasn't malice that fueled Hayes, at least not entirely. It was something more insidious, a mix of unchecked authority and deeply ingrained bias he'd never cared to confront. Seeing a young black woman driving a luxury car like Kira's instantly triggered his suspicions. To him, it didn't add up. How could someone like her, young, black, and confident, afford something so expensive? His mind filled in the blanks with prejudice, drawing a line between her success and something illicit. Hayes wasn't new to this game. He had a reputation among his peers for his gut instincts that often leaned on stereotypes more than evidence. His stops were justified in his mind, bolstered by a belief that he was rooting out troublemakers, and if, occasionally, he crossed the line to confiscate a flashy vehicle or intimidate a suspect, well, that was just part of maintaining order. It never occurred to him that his actions might harm the innocent, or that he might be the problem. As Hayes approached Kira's car, He exuded confidence. The rigid stride, the clipped tone, the way his hand lingered near his belt. Every movement was calculated to assert dominance. But tonight, Hayes was about to learn a hard lesson. What he assumed to be a routine stop would soon spiral out of his control. Kira, too, was no stranger to moments like this. She faced skepticism and prejudice her entire career. Whether it was investors doubting her capabilities or strangers making assumptions about her success, Kira had learned to remain composed in the face of unwarranted judgment. But as Hayes' flashlight lingered on her laptop bag and tech gadgets, Kira's instincts told her this stop was different. The clash between Kira and Hayes wasn't just about a car or a traffic stop. It was a collision of two worlds. On one side stood Kira, a self-made success story determined to control her own narrative. On the other was Hayes, a man who had allowed his biases and authority to corrupt his sense of justice. As their paths crossed on that empty stretch of road, neither could predict the chain of events that was about to unfold. For Kira, it would be a test of resilience and ingenuity. For Hayes, it would be the moment his unchecked power met its reckoning. The quiet hum of Kira Mason's Tesla Model 3 was nearly drowned out by the pounding of her heartbeat as Officer Walter Hayes' flashlight continued its sweep of her car's interior. His dismissive attitude had already set her nerves on edge, but now, his lingering gaze on her gadgets and laptop bag felt invasive, like a silent accusation she hadn't earned. "Step out of the vehicle," Hayes ordered, his tone sharp, almost predatory. Kira's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. "Officer," she said calmly, though a flicker of frustration bubbled into her voice, "may I ask why I'm being asked to exit my car? I haven't been speeding, and I've complied with every request." Hayes tilted his head, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting her own concerned expression back at her. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle," he repeated, ignoring her question entirely. Taking a deep breath, Kira unbuckled her seatbelt. She knew better than to escalate the situation. Black women like her didn't have the luxury of making mistakes during encounters like this. She opened the door slowly and stepped out, her heels crunching on the gravel shoulder. The setting sun painted long shadows across the empty road, the isolation of the moment sinking into her chest like a weight. Hayes circled her car like a predator sizing up its prey. His flashlight's beam danced across the sleek surface of the Tesla, then back to Kira, scrutinizing every detail of her appearance, her tailored suit, her manicured nails, her calm yet controlled demeanor. Everything about her screamed successful, and that alone seemed to irk him. "This is quite the vehicle," Hayes muttered, more to himself than to her, though the implication was clear. He didn't believe she belonged in it. Kira's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure. "Yes, it is. I worked hard for it." Hayes stopped his pacing and turned to face her. "Mind telling me what kind of work you do?" Kira folded her arms, meeting his gaze squarely. "I'm the founder and CEO of Mason Cybersecurity Solutions. We provide digital infrastructure and security for Fortune 500 companies. Would you like a brochure?" Her sarcasm was subtle but pointed, and it didn't escape Hayes. He frowned, his hand resting casually on the grip of his holstered weapon, a movement that wasn't lost on Kira. "No need for that," he said, his tone hardening. "But you wouldn't mind if I took a closer look at the vehicle, would you? Is there a reason to suspect something illegal, officer?" Kira countered, the edge in her voice finally breaking through her calm facade. Hayes ignored her question again, turning his attention back to the car. "Stay where you are," he barked before walking toward his cruiser. Kira watched him in the side mirror as he spoke into his radio, occasionally glancing back in her direction. Her stomach churned. This wasn't about the car, it was about her. She'd faced this type of unwarranted scrutiny before, and no matter how many times it happened, the knot of anger and helplessness in her chest never got easier to bear. When Hayes returned, his expression was colder, harder. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with authority, "I'm confiscating this vehicle as part of an ongoing investigation." Kira blinked, momentarily stunned. Confiscating? She echoed, her voice rising. On what grounds? This is my car. I have the paperwork, registration, insurance, everything. Hayes shrugged, his hand outstretched. Keys, ma'am. Now. The blatant abuse of power ignited something in Kira. She was no stranger to men like Hayes, men who wielded their authority like a weapon, using it to justify their biases and keep people like her in check. But she also knew how to play the long game. Anger wouldn't serve her here. Strategy would. Officer Hayes, she said, her voice even and deliberate as she handed over the keys, I hope you realize that this is entirely unlawful. I will be contacting my attorney and filing a formal complaint. Do whatever you want, Hayes replied, pocketing the keys. You can pick up your car once the investigation is complete. Kira took a step forward, her gaze locked on Hayes' retreating form. You're making a mistake, she said firmly, her voice carrying an authority of its own. This car isn't just a vehicle. It's protected by something far beyond your jurisdiction. Hayes paused, glancing back over his shoulder with a smirk. Is that so? It's a high-tech machine under my complete control, Kira warned, her tone cold and calculating. You'll regret underestimating me. But Hayes only laughed as he slid into the driver's seat. The Tesla's sleek interface lit up as the door closed behind him. The electric hum of the engine came to life, and without another word, he pulled onto the road, leaving Kira standing alone on the shoulder. The dust settled around her as the taillights of her stolen car disappeared into the distance. For a moment, Kira stood motionless, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. But she wasn't one to crumble under pressure. Reaching into her blazer pocket, she pulled out her phone and tapped the Tesla app. The screen displayed a real-time GPS tracker showing the car's location as it moved further away. With a few swipes, she accessed the car's advanced control system. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with the rush of adrenaline that came with knowing she was about to turn the tables. You want to play games, Officer Hayes? She muttered under her breath. Let's play. The first command was simple: engage Guardian mode. The Tesla's advanced security system, an experimental program Kira had developed herself, sprang to life. It disabled the vehicle's manual controls, locked the doors, and activated a sequence of warnings designed to disorient any unauthorized user. Inside the car, Hayes frowned as the dashboard lit up with unfamiliar alerts. The beeping grew louder, and the screens filled with scrolling lines of code he didn't understand. What the hell? He muttered, jabbing at buttons and knobs in a futile attempt to regain control. Suddenly, Kira's voice echoed through the car's speakers. Calm, measured, and brimming with authority, it filled the small cabin. Officer Hayes, she said, this car isn't just a vehicle. It's a statement. A statement against people like you who think they can abuse their power without consequences. Hayes stiffened, his hands gripping the wheel as he scanned the interior, searching for a hidden microphone or camera. What is this? He growled. Where are you? Kira's laughter was cold and sharp. I'm everywhere, officer. And right now, I'm in control. The car swerved suddenly, forcing Hayes to tighten his grip as the autopilot engaged, pulling the Tesla to a stop on the side of the road. The doors locked with a mechanical click, and the windows rolled up. Hayes was trapped. You think you can take what's mine without repercussions? Kira continued. Think again. Hayes' bravado faltered as sweat beaded on his forehead. He slammed his fists against the steering wheel. Let me out of here, he shouted. Kira watched his panic unfold through the car's interior cameras, her expression unyielding. This wasn't just about teaching Hayes a lesson. It was about confronting a system that allowed men like him to operate unchecked. Officer Hayes, she said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. Do you know how many people like me have been targeted because of your hunches? How many lives you've disrupted with your baseless accusations? Tonight, you're going to feel what it's like to be powerless. Hayes' breathing quickened as the car's air vents began to close, the cabin growing stiflingly hot. "You can't do this," he shouted. "This is illegal." Kira's voice was icy. "Illegal? You mean like confiscating someone's property without cause? Like profiling an innocent person because they don't fit your idea of success?" Outside, the evening air was cool and calm, but inside the Tesla, Hayes was unraveling. For the first time in his career, he was experiencing the helplessness he had so often inflicted on others. And for Kira, this was just the beginning of his reckoning. Inside the stifling cabin of the Tesla, Officer Walter Hayes wiped sweat from his brow, his confidence eroding with every passing second. The beeping from the dashboard grew louder, and the disorienting pulsing of the car's interior lights threw him off balance. Every button he pressed only seemed to intensify the car's ominous warnings. His chest tightened as Kira's calm, composed voice once again filled the car's speakers. "You've had your fun, Officer Hayes," she said, her tone cutting like a blade. "Now it's time for me to show you exactly what happens when someone abuses their power." Hayes clenched his jaw, his fists pounding against the steering wheel. "Let me out of this car now," he bellowed. Instead of answering, Kira activated the Tesla's custom-installed Guardian protocol. Developed in secret as a countermeasure against unauthorized access, the program was designed to lock out intruders, disable vehicle controls, and send out alerts to a secure server. What Hayes didn't realize was that Kira had also built in advanced AI monitoring tools and remote control capabilities, granting her the ability to dictate the car's every move from her phone. The car's lights dimmed momentarily before flickering back on in a blood-red hue. Hayes froze as a new message scrolled across the dashboard screen. "Unauthorized user detected. Consequences will escalate." "What the hell?" Hayes muttered under his breath, panic rising in his chest. Suddenly, the air conditioning kicked on full blast, followed by the sound of the windows rolling up. A gust of freezing air filled the cabin, chilling Hayes to the bone. He reached for the door handle, only to find it locked. The car's AI had taken complete control. Meanwhile, Kira watched from her laptop at a nearby cafe. Through the Tesla's cameras, she could see Hayes growing increasingly agitated, his earlier bravado replaced by fear and frustration. The sight was satisfying but also deeply sobering. This wasn't just about Hayes. He was a symptom of a much larger problem. For every Hayes, there were countless others operating under the same broken system, targeting people like her simply because they could. Still, tonight wasn't just about making a point. Kira had bigger plans, and Hayes' actions had just set them into motion. Tapping a few keys on her laptop, she activated the Tesla's voice interaction feature. "Officer Hayes," she said, her voice echoing through the car's speakers, "you've made it clear you think you can act without accountability. Let's see how you handle a taste of your own medicine." Hayes' head jerked up at the sound of her voice. "Where are you? Show yourself." Kira chuckled softly, the sound unnerving in its calmness. "You're not in control anymore, officer." "I am." As Hayes struggled to come to terms with his situation, Kira escalated the Guardian protocol. The dashboard's display changed again, now showing multiple live feeds, interior cameras from the car, exterior shots of Hayes during the stop, and most damning, audio recordings of his dismissive and prejudiced comments toward Kira. "What is this?" Hayes growled, his hands trembling as he gripped the steering wheel. "This is evidence," Kira replied coldly. "Every word you said, every action you took during this stop, recorded and uploaded to my secure servers. If I wanted to, I could have this footage circulating online within minutes. Imagine what your precinct would think of that, or the media, or the public." Hayes' throat tightened. He had spent years cultivating an image of authority and professionalism, and while he knew his methods were sometimes questionable, he had always thought himself untouchable. Now, faced with the prospect of public exposure, he felt the weight of his actions crashing down on him. "You can't do this," Hayes said, his voice cracking slightly. "You'll ruin my life." Kira's tone sharpened. "Ruin your life? You mean the way you tried to ruin mine?" or the lives of others you've targeted without cause. Let me remind you, officer, you didn't just pull me over. You decided I didn't deserve to own what I worked hard for. You thought you could take it because you assumed I wouldn't fight back. Well, guess what? You were wrong. Hayes leaned back in the driver's seat, his mind racing. The car was no longer just a machine. It was a weapon in Kira's hands, one she wielded with precision and purpose. He thought back to his years on the force, the countless stops he'd made, and the lines he'd crossed without hesitation. For the first time, he began to question his own motivations. I didn't mean for this to happen, Hayes said, his voice quieter now, tinged with regret. It's just, this job, it gets to you. You see so much crime, so many people lying, and you start making assumptions. Sometimes, those assumptions are wrong. Kira raised an eyebrow as she listened to him through her laptop. You think this is about stress? About making mistakes? No, Officer Hayes. This is about systemic bias and abuse of power. It's about people like you using your position to target those who don't fit your idea of who belongs. You didn't see a successful woman driving a car she earned. You saw a threat. And that's the problem. Hayes swallowed hard. He wanted to argue, to justify his actions, but deep down, he knew she was right. His hunches weren't based on evidence, they were rooted in prejudice. And now, faced with the consequences, he felt a strange mix of shame and vulnerability. Okay, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. You're right. I was wrong. But what do you want from me? An apology? Kira's laugh was humorless. An apology? No, officer. I want something much bigger than that. I want accountability, not just for you, but for the entire system that enables people like you to operate without oversight. As Kira's words sank in, Hayes felt his carefully constructed worldview begin to crack. He had always seen himself as a protector, someone who upheld the law and kept his community safe. But now, he was being forced to confront the reality of his actions. The harm he had caused, the lives he had disrupted, and the power he had abused. The memory of past encounters flashed through his mind. The single mother in tears as he impounded her car, the young man handcuffed for questioning without cause, the countless faces of people he had judged and punished without proof. He rubbed his temples, the weight of it all pressing down on him. What? What are you going to do with that footage? He asked, his voice shaky. That depends on you, Kira replied. You can choose to walk away from this, pretend it never happened, and let me expose everything. Or you can start making amends. Hayes blinked, confused. Making amends? How? Kira leaned forward, her fingers poised over her laptop's keyboard. I want the truth, Officer Hayes. Not just about tonight, but about every corrupt practice in your precinct. The illegal stops, the fabricated reports, the bribes, everything. You're going to help me expose it all. Hayes' mind reeled. Betraying his colleagues would make him a pariah in the force, but refusing could mean public disgrace and the end of his career. The weight of the decision crushed him, and for the first time, he realized there was no easy way out. This isn't just about me, Hayes said finally, his voice filled with desperation. If I do this, I'll lose everything. My job, my reputation, my family. Kira's tone softened slightly, though her resolve remained firm. You already lost your integrity, Hayes. This is your chance to get it back. The car fell silent, save for the faint hum of the electric motor. Hayes stared at the dashboard, the scrolling code a stark reminder of the control Kira had over the situation. Slowly he nodded. Okay, he said, his voice trembling. I'll help you. Kira smiled, though it was laced with the satisfaction of knowing she had just gained an unexpected ally. Good, she said, because this is just the beginning. As Kira deactivated the Guardian protocol, the car unlocked, and Hayes stepped out, his face pale but resolute. This moment wasn't just a turning point for their conflict, it was the start of a much larger battle, one that would challenge everything Hayes thought he knew about justice, loyalty, and redemption. As the headlights of the Tesla flickered back to life and the doors unlocked, Officer Walter Hayes stepped out into the cool night air, feeling as though he had just emerged from a nightmare. But this was no dream. The lingering hum of the car's engine and Kira Mason's unwavering voice in his memory reminded him that the nightmare was far from over. It had only begun. Kira watched Hayes through her laptop screen, her hands steady, but her mind racing. She had just secured a reluctant ally, but she knew this wasn't a victory. Hayes was only one piece of the puzzle, and the larger picture revealed a corrupt system deeply entrenched in her city. It wasn't enough to expose one bad officer. She had to dismantle the entire network. The next morning, Kira reached out to someone she believed could be trusted, Detective Sarah Chen, an officer with a reputation for integrity. Sarah was known for her relentless pursuit of justice, often working in the shadows to expose misconduct within the precinct. When Kira called Sarah, she wasted no time getting to the point. "I need someone on the inside," Kira said, her voice resolute. "Someone who still believes in what the badge is supposed to stand for." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Sarah replied. "If you're calling me, you've got something big. Let's meet in person." The two met later that evening in a quiet corner of a downtown cafe. Sarah's sharp eyes scanned Kira as she slid a folder across the table. Inside were screenshots, transcripts, and videos from Kira's encounter with Hayes. As Sarah flipped through the contents, her expression darkened. "This is damning," Sarah said, her voice low. "But Hayes is just the tip of the iceberg, isn't he?" Kira nodded. "He's agreed to help, but the corruption runs deeper. I need your help to uncover it." Sarah leaned back in her chair, considering. "If what you're saying is true, this could blow the department wide open. But it also means we're up against people who won't go down without a fight." Kira met her gaze. "I'm prepared for that. Are you?" Sarah smirked. "Always." With Sarah on board, Kira began piecing together the connections that tied the precinct's corruption to a larger scheme. Hayes provided invaluable intel, albeit reluctantly. Through long nights of tense conversations, he began naming names. Officers who routinely falsified reports, seized assets without cause, and pocketed cash under the guise of confidential informant fees. One name stood out above the rest. Lieutenant Martin Reynolds, the officer Hayes reported to, and a man known for his results-driven approach. Hayes revealed that Reynolds was more than just a corrupt cop. He was the linchpin of an entire operation that funneled stolen vehicles, including Kira's Tesla, into a black market ring. "He has connections everywhere," Hayes admitted during one of their covert meetings. "Judges, politicians, even private security firms. If we go after him, we're taking on more than just the precinct." Kira's resolve only hardened. "Then we'll need more allies." Realizing the magnitude of what they were up against, Kira and Sarah worked together to assemble a team. They couldn't rely solely on cops. Many were either complicit or too afraid to speak out. Instead, they sought out people with different expertise. Marcus "Sly" Daniels, a former private investigator turned freelance hacker, Sly was known for his ability to unearth hidden records and encrypted communications. Kira approached him through a mutual contact in the tech world. At first, he was skeptical. "You're telling me you want to take on corrupt cops and a black market car ring?" Sly asked, leaning back in his chair. "Lady, that's suicide." Kira's response was simple. "You want to make a difference or just keep cashing checks from cheating spouses?" Sly grinned. "Fair point. I'm in." Jomo Mason, Kira's brother, recently released from prison after being framed by the same corrupt system, was initially hesitant to get involved. The scars of his unjust incarceration were still fresh, but when Kira showed him the evidence they had gathered, his hesitation turned to determination. "They took years of my life," Jomo said, his voice heavy with emotion. "If there's a chance to stop them from doing it to someone else, I'll do whatever it takes." Rebecca Torres, a local journalist with a history of uncovering corruption, Rebecca was Kira's secret weapon for exposing their findings to the public. Rebecca's connections in the media would ensure that their story couldn't be buried. As the team worked together, the full scope of the operation began to come into focus. Reynolds' black market ring didn't just target expensive cars. It preyed on vulnerable individuals. Immigrants, small business owners, and marginalized communities were disproportionately targeted under the guise of routine stops. Vehicles were confiscated and either sold off or used to launder money from other illicit activities. SLE uncovered financial records linking Reynolds to a shell company that funneled profits through a web of offshore accounts. Sarah, working undercover, began piecing together evidence from within the precinct, secretly recording conversations and photographing documents. Meanwhile, Hayes provided insight into how the operation was carried out on the ground. "It's all about the appearance of legitimacy," Hayes explained during one of their meetings. "They use just enough paperwork to make it look legal, but it's all a front." The deeper they dug, the more dangerous their mission became. Rebecca published a preliminary article hinting at the investigation, which sent shockwaves through the city. The backlash was immediate. Reynolds and his allies tightened their grip, launching an internal investigation to root out traitors. One evening, as Kira reviewed documents in her home office, her phone buzzed with an urgent message from Sly. "We've been compromised. Pull back now." Before Kira could react, the sound of tires screeching outside sent a chill down her spine. Peering through the window, she saw two unmarked black SUVs parked across the street. Her instincts kicked in. Grabbing her laptop and a portable hard drive, she activated the Tesla's remote security system, setting off its alarms to create a distraction. Moments later, the SUVs roared to life, speeding away as Kira slipped out the back door, her heart pounding. She called Sarah, her voice shaking. "They know. We're running out of time." Sarah's response was immediate. "Meet me at the safe house. We'll regroup." At the safe house, a modest, nondescript apartment in a quiet neighborhood, the team gathered to reassess their plan. The attack on Kira was a clear warning, but it only strengthened their resolve. "We need to go public," Rebecca argued. "If we wait any longer, they'll bury us." Kira shook her head. "Not yet. We need something bigger, something they can't refute." Hayes stepped forward, his expression grim. "There's one place where Reynolds keeps everything: transaction records, bribes, all of it. His private office at the downtown precinct." Sarah's eyes widened. "You're talking about breaking into a police precinct. That's insane." "It's our only shot," Hayes said firmly, "but I can't do it alone." Under the cover of darkness, the team executed their riskiest operation yet. Hayes, dressed in his uniform, used his credentials to gain access to the precinct. Meanwhile, Kira and Sly monitored the building's security systems from a nearby van, disabling cameras and rerouting feeds in real time. Inside, Hayes made his way to Reynolds' office, his heart pounding with every step. When he reached the door, he inserted a small USB drive provided by Sly, which bypassed the lock's electronic security. The office was eerily quiet, the faint hum of a desktop computer the only sound. Hayes quickly rifled through filing cabinets, snapping photos of documents and stuffing others into a bag. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Hayes froze, his mind racing. If he was caught, there would be no talking his way out of this. "Kira," he whispered into his earpiece, "we've got company." "Hold tight," Kira replied. "I'm sending a diversion." Seconds later, the fire alarm blared, flooding the hallway with red strobe lights. The footsteps retreated, and Hayes let out a shaky breath. He finished gathering the evidence and slipped out of the office, his adrenaline surging as he made his way back to the van. The evidence Hayes recovered was the final piece of the puzzle. Detailed transaction records, names of accomplices, and even recordings of incriminating conversations. All of it pointed directly to Reynolds and his network. Rebecca wasted no time preparing an exposé, while Kira encrypted the files and sent copies to trusted allies in the media and law enforcement. When the story broke, it was nothing short of explosive. Headlines declared, "Police corruption ring exposed. Lieutenant Reynolds at the center of scandal." Public outrage reached a boiling point, with protests erupting across the city and demands for reform growing louder by the hour. Reynolds was arrested, along with several high-ranking officials implicated in the scheme. For Kira and her team, it was a hard-fought victory, but the battle for justice was far from over. In the weeks that followed, Kira's efforts led to sweeping changes in the precinct, with new oversight policies and independent investigations launched into systemic misconduct. Hayes, now a whistleblower, became a polarizing figure, hailed as a hero by some and a traitor by others. Sitting across from Kira in her office one evening, he sighed, "I didn't think I'd come out of this with anything left." Kira smiled. Sometimes, starting over is the best thing you can do. Their partnership, born from conflict and mistrust, had grown into something neither of them expected. A shared purpose to fight for justice, no matter the cost. And as they looked ahead, they knew this was just the beginning of their mission. The fluorescent lights in the police precinct flickered as Lieutenant Martin Reynolds sat alone in the interrogation room. His tailored suit, now wrinkled, clung to him like a heavy burden. He stared at the cold steel table, his jaw tight and his fingers twitching in frustration. Hours ago, his name had been synonymous with power. Now he was a man on the brink of losing everything. Across the city, Kira Mason and Detective Sarah Chen watched from a secured room in the same building. Through the one-way glass, they observed Reynolds as he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Kira leaned forward, her expression a mixture of determination and restraint. "He doesn't look so untouchable now," she said, her voice low but firm. Sarah nodded, her own feelings conflicted. "He's cornered, but men like Reynolds don't go down without a fight. We need to make this airtight." The room door creaked open, and Officer Walter Hayes entered, holding a thick manila folder. Reynolds' eyes darted to him, narrowing with recognition. "Hayes," he said, his voice laced with scorn. "Didn't think you had the spine for something like this." Hayes sat across from Reynolds, placing the folder on the table between them. "Spine has nothing to do with it," he said, his voice steady. "This is about making things right. Something you've never cared about." Reynolds sneered. "Right. That's rich coming from someone who's been on my payroll for years. Don't act like you're some saint now." Hayes' jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he opened the folder, revealing a stack of incriminating documents. Photos of confiscated cars, wire transfers to offshore accounts, and surveillance footage linked to Reynolds' black market dealings spilled across the table. "You've been sloppy, Martin," Hayes said, his tone calm but cutting. "Or maybe you thought you were untouchable." Reynolds' eyes scanned the evidence, his bravado faltering for a brief moment. But he quickly regained his composure, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. "You think this is enough to take me down? I've got people in my corner, powerful people. Judges, city officials, even federal agents. You have no idea how deep this goes." The door opened again, and Kira stepped into the room, her heels clicking against the floor. She carried a laptop under one arm, her face composed, but her eyes blazing with intensity. Reynolds' smirk faltered as he recognized her. "You," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "The tech genius who thinks she can play cop. I don't have time for this." Kira placed the laptop on the table, opening it with practiced precision. The screen lit up with video footage of Reynolds, recorded by hidden cameras in his office. The audio played back snippets of Dannon conversations. Orders to falsify reports, discussions about laundering money, and instructions to target individuals who wouldn't fight back. Reynolds' face turned ashen. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his voice rising. Kira didn't answer immediately. She leaned forward, her voice calm but unyielding. You thought you could take what was mine, my car, my dignity, and walk away without consequences. But this isn't just about me. It's about every person you've crushed under the weight of your corruption. Reynolds glared at her, but Kira didn't flinch. You built an empire on stolen lives, Martin. And now it's all coming down. Reynolds scoffed, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. So what? You're going to send me to jail? Even if you do, I'll be out in a year. People like me don't stay down for long. Kira tilted her head, a small smile playing on her lips. Jail is just the beginning, she said. We've already released the story to the media. Every news outlet in the city is running it right now. Your name, your face, your entire operation, it's all out there for the world to see. Reynolds slammed his fist on the table, his composure cracking. You're ruining my life. Kira's expression hardened. Your life? What about the lives you've ruined? My brother spent 3 years in prison because of your lies. He missed our mother's funeral because of you. And he's just one name on a long list of people who suffered while you lined your pockets. Reynolds opened his mouth to retort, but Kira cut him off. This is your last chance, Martin. We have everything we need to bury you. But if you cooperate, if you expose the rest of the network, you won't have a shot at redemption. Reynolds laughed bitterly. Redemption? You think I care about redemption? Kira met his gaze, her voice cold. I think you care about saving your own skin. And right now, that's your only option. Reynolds' bravado slipped further as he sat in silence, staring at the evidence before him. He thought of the people he protected, the powerful figures who'd promised him immunity in exchange for his loyalty. But now, faced with irrefutable proof of his crimes, he realized those promises were worthless. They would abandon him the moment he became a liability. For the first time in years, doubt crept into his mind. Was this how it all ended? Alone, exposed, and utterly powerless. He looked at Kira, her unwavering determination a stark contrast to his crumbling resolve. Hayes, the man he once controlled, now sat across from him, radiating quiet strength. Even Sarah Chen, who had been a thorn in his side for years, stood ready to see him fall. Reynolds exhaled sharply. If I talk, he said slowly, I need guarantees. Witness protection. Reduced charges. I'm not going down for everything. Kira leaned back, crossing her arms. We can work with that. But you're going to give us everything? Names, locations, operations. No half-truths, no omissions. Reynolds nodded reluctantly. Fine. I'll talk. But if I go down, I'm taking everyone with me. Over the next several hours, Reynolds detailed the inner workings of the network. He named judges, politicians, and business leaders who had benefited from the scheme. He provided access to hidden accounts, encrypted files, and secret meeting locations. As the weight of his confession grew, Reynolds slumped further into his chair, the full extent of his actions finally hitting him. I didn't start out like this, he muttered, almost to himself. I joined the force to make a difference. But the system, it changes you. You either play along, or you get crushed. Kira's voice softened slightly, but her resolve remained. You had a choice, Martin. You chose to hurt people, to take the easy way out, and now you're paying the price. Reynolds looked up at her, his eyes hollow. Do you really think exposing me will change anything? The system is bigger than one man. Kira straightened, her voice steady. It starts with one man. And then another. And another. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it happens because people choose to fight for it. Reynolds didn't respond. For the first time, he seemed truly defeated. In the weeks that followed, Reynolds' testimony led to dozens of arrests. High-ranking officials, once thought untouchable, were brought to justice. The public outcry spurred sweeping reforms, with independent oversight committees established to hold law enforcement accountable. For Kira, the victory was bittersweet. She had achieved justice for her brother and countless others, but the scars of the battle remained. As she stood on the steps of City Hall, watching reporters swarm for interviews, She felt a deep sense of purpose. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a much larger fight. For Hayes, the confrontation had been transformative. Once a man complicit in the system's corruption, he now worked tirelessly to rebuild trust and integrity. And for Reynolds, redemption came not in forgiveness, but in accountability. His cooperation had spared him the harshest penalties, but his name would forever be synonymous with betrayal. As Kira and Hayes left the precinct together one evening, Hayes spoke quietly. "Do you think people can really change?" Kira glanced at him, a faint smile on her lips. "I think change is a choice, and you made the right one." Hayes nodded, the weight of his own transformation settling on his shoulders. "Here's to more right choices." And with that, they walked into the night, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The courtroom was packed. The air buzzed with tension as reporters jostled for space, their cameras clicking incessantly. Outside, protesters held signs demanding accountability, their chants echoing against the courthouse walls. Inside, Lieutenant Martin Reynolds sat at the defense table, his once commanding presence reduced to a sullen figure in a rumpled suit. Kira Mason sat in the gallery, her face calm, but her eyes sharp, watching every move. The trial had been swift but damning. Reynolds's testimony had unraveled a web of corruption so vast that it implicated over 24 officers, 5 judges, and 3 prominent business leaders. Each piece of evidence, meticulously collected and verified by Kira, Hayes, and their team, painted an undeniable picture of greed and systemic abuse. As the prosecutor delivered his closing arguments, the room fell silent. "This case is about more than just Lieutenant Reynolds," he said, gesturing to the man at the defense table. "It's about the lives shattered by a culture of corruption, the trust betrayed, and the power abused. Today, we have the chance to send a message that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law." When the jury returned with a verdict, the tension in the room was palpable. As the foreperson read the words, "Guilty on all counts," a collective sigh of relief swept through the gallery. Reynolds's head dropped, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of his actions had finally crushed him. Outside, the crowd erupted in cheers. News outlets flashed the headline, "Justice delivered. Corruption ring dismantled." For Kira, the victory was deeply personal. She thought of her brother Jamal, who had spent 3 years in prison because of this very system. As reporters swarmed her for comments, she spoke with quiet conviction. This isn't just about one case. It's about creating a future where no one is targeted because of the color of their skin, their success, or their audacity to thrive. We have a long way to go, but today is a step in the right direction. Weeks after the trial, Reynolds sat in a small, windowless cell, staring at the gray walls. His plea deal had reduced his sentence significantly, but the cost was steep. He had lost everything: his career, his reputation, and the respect of those who once feared him. One day, he received an unexpected visitor, Kara. She stood outside his cell, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "Why are you here?" Reynolds asked, his voice hoarse. "I wanted to see for myself," Kira said evenly. "To see if you've learned anything." Reynolds scoffed but then sighed, his bravado slipping away. "You think this is what I wanted? To end up here?" "No," Kira replied. "But every choice you made brought you here. You could have stopped at any point. You didn't." Reynolds looked away, the weight of her words settling heavily on him. "Do you think I can ever make this right?" he asked quietly. Kira hesitated, then said, "Not for me. Not for my brother. But maybe for yourself. Redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about making sure it doesn't repeat." She turned to leave but paused at the door. "What you do next is up to you." As the door closed behind her, Reynolds sat in silence, the echo of her words lingering in the air. For Kira, the victory against Reynolds and his network wasn't the end of her fight. It was the beginning of something much larger. She used the momentum to expand her cybersecurity firm, turning it into a hub for social justice technology. Her team developed tools to help monitor police accountability, detect racial profiling in traffic stops, and provide resources for victims of systemic abuse. One afternoon, she visited Jomal at his apartment. The two siblings sat on the balcony, the city skyline stretching before them. "You did it," Jomal said, pride evident in his voice. "We did it," Kira corrected. "And we're not done yet." Jomal smiled, the shadows of his past slowly lifting. "Mom would have been proud." Kira nodded, her eyes glistening. "She would have wanted us to keep fighting." Walter Hayes had never imagined himself on the other side of the thin blue line. But after everything he'd been through, he knew he could never return to the man he once was. He poured his energy into community outreach, partnering with Kira and Jomal to create programs aimed at rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the communities they served. At one event, a young black boy approached Hayes, looking up at him with wide eyes. "You used to be a cop, right?" Hayes crouched down to meet his gaze. "I did." "Are you a good guy now?" the boy asked, his voice filled with innocent curiosity. Hayes smiled, the question hitting deeper than the child realized. "I'm trying to be," he said. "Every day." The ripple effects of Kira and Hayes' work spread throughout the city. New policies were implemented to ensure greater transparency in law enforcement. Independent oversight committees were established, and community leaders were given seats at the table. The city, once plagued by corruption and mistrust, began to heal. At a town hall meeting months later, Kira stood before a crowd, her voice filled with both hope and determination. "We're not just fighting for justice, we're building a future where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. And we're doing it together." The applause was thunderous, but for Kira, the real reward was seeing the faces in the crowd. People who had once felt powerless now standing united. Late one evening, Kira sat at her desk, scrolling through messages from people whose lives had been touched by her work. One email stood out. A letter from a young woman inspired by Kira's story to start her own initiative for justice. As Kira read the letter, a smile spread across her face. She glanced at a photo on her desk, a picture of her, Jomal, and their mother, taken long before their lives had been appended. "We're doing it, Mom," she whispered. "We're making it better." Outside, the city buzzed with life, its streets illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights. Kira leaned back in her chair, ready for whatever came next. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, it felt like they were winning. In the quiet solitude of his cell, Reynolds began writing, a memoir of sorts. It started as an attempt to make sense of his downfall, but over time, it became something more, an account of corruption, power, and regret. He detailed the systemic issues he had both exploited and suffered under, hoping his words might serve as a warning to others. Months later, Kira received a copy of his manuscript in the mail. Attached was a note. "For what it's worth, I'm trying to do better. Thank you for making me see the truth." Kira set the manuscript aside, unsure if she would read it. Redemption, she realized, wasn't hers to grant, it was Reynolds' journey to undertake. As the sun set over the city, Kira, Hayes, and Jomal gathered at a park where children played and families picnicked. They watched as the community they had fought so hard to protect came together in harmony. "This is what it's all about," Hayes said, his voice filled with quiet satisfaction. Kira nodded, her heart full. "And it's just the beginning." Together, they raised a toast to justice, to change, and to the enduring fight for a better tomorrow. As the camera pans away from the peaceful park scene where Kira, Hayes, and Jomal sit together, laughter and hope filling the air, the frame shifts to a dimly lit alley in the heart of the city. A sleek black SUV pulls up, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The passenger door opens, and a man in a crisp suit steps out, his face obscured by shadows. He checks his watch, muttering into a Bluetooth earpiece. From the shadows, a hooded figure watches, holding a small recording device. The figure's hands tremble slightly as the man exchanges a thick envelope with another individual, their voices low but urgent. "You're sure she's not going to be a problem?" the man asks, his tone sharp. "Not if we handle it quickly," the second figure replies. "The fallout from Reynolds has already set us back. If Mason digs any deeper, she could ruin everything." The hooded figure inches closer, capturing every word before retreating into the night, their footsteps echoing in the narrow alleyway. Meanwhile, in her office, Kira sits at her desk, reviewing data from a new whistleblower tip. Her brows knit together as she notices something unusual: untraceable wire transfers, obscure shell companies, and connections to a new name: Victor Kane, a powerful financier with ties to global trade and politics. Her fingers fly across the keyboard as she cross-references the information. The more she uncovers, the darker the picture becomes. Hayes walks in, a file in hand. "Got something new for you," he says, dropping the folder on her desk. "Word on the street is someone's not happy with what we've been digging up." Kira looks up, her eyes steely. "Good. That means we're getting close."